Rémi, bonjour.
Bonjour, buenos dias. Hi,
Buenos
how
dias.
are you?
Doing fantastic. For everybody, we're here with Metropolitan and interviewing a hero of ours, Rémi, who's always been fighting for and the environment, the oceans, the whales. And Rémi, it's an honor and a privilege to have you with us today. Um, I was hoping that perhaps you can introduce yourself a little bit to our team for those who even haven't had the pleasure of knowing you or who haven't known what you're up to in the last few years.
Hi, my name is Rémi Parmentier. Yeah, I've been an environmental advocate since 1974, believe it or not. So it's soon going to be 50 years, 50. So you may wonder, whew, this guy must be a loser because the environment is in really bad shape. And my answer to that is, well, the trends are no good. But what is even more scary is that if we environmental activists had not been around all those years, the situation would be even worse, worse, worse. So that's an encouragement to continue, and moreover to encourage the young ones to take over because of course we're all biodegradable, but at my age I'm more biodegradable than others.
Well, the reason I wanted to ask you here today is because you've made uh, your position on trying to protect the environment is unquestioned, and you're an inspiration for so many people. This year, we've seen a lot of, I guess, advances and signings of treaties and things that people have been trying to negotiate for many years in Canada. And I wanted to understand why you think the Spanish election that's upcoming is important to the environment and protection of the oceans.
Well, maybe I will ask you a question in return. Do you think that the answer to the climate emergency, to climate change, is putting flower pots on the balconies of people in cities? If you,
Absolutely not.
well, absolutely not. However, this is the policy that is being defended by the ideologist of the Conservative Party of Spain. It's their way to ridicule the work of scientists and the findings of the International Panel of Experts on Climate Change, the IPCC, and to ridicule the efforts of the current government to enhance the ecological and energy transition. So, with people of that sort, possibly winning the general election, yes, the environment will be in trouble in Spain even more than it is. In the last 4 years, there has been a lot of progress made, especially through the creation by Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of a very powerful and large ministry for the ecological transition, which includes competency on energy issues. And there is a fear that should the current majority lose the election on 23rd July, all of that would vanish and be thrown into the dustbin by a new right-wing majority. So there is you can see it on Twitter. There is an hashtag which in Spanish it reads "Lo que nos jugamos." In English, that would be "What is at stake?" And a lot of people are raising their concern about not only environmental issues, but indeed me environmental issues is my thing, right? And so I have responded to the request to post a little video where I explain what is at stake with the environment and the energy transition and climate change if the current government was to lose the election.
Okay, so can you give us a little bit?
And let me add one thing.
Absolutely.
It is the first time in nearly 50 years of environmental activism that I am taking side in an election in any country. So that should give you an idea of the seriousness of this situation, to my mind, but I think I can speak on behalf of all environmentalists, not only in Spain, but in Europe and in the rest of the world. Imagine that Spain would be represented at the climate UN negotiations, or in Brussels in the negotiations on the European Green Deal, by people who dare to say that the solution to climate change is putting flower pots on the balconies of our houses. This is really serious. We're in 2023. It's unbelievable that people who claim to take public office would say such a silly, I'll use the word silly. I could use some stronger words. Silly statements like that. Unbelievable, unacceptable.
Well, with so much at stake, the biodiversity, the mining, it takes so long to make real progress. And can you share a little bit about the progress that has been made this year?
Yeah, that's a good example. So in December last year, there was finally an agreement to protect. It's an agreement under the framework of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, right? And approximately 194 ministers from all over the world, including the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain, Teresa Ribera, came to Montreal. I was there, and agreed that by 2030, we should protect 30% of land and ocean worldwide. And what's happening now? There is a discussion of a law at the European level to make this a reality. It's called the Draft Law on Nature Restoration. And just this week, the European Popular Party, that is to say the Conservatives, have been campaigning with fake news to oppose the implementation of this draft law proposed by the European Commission, in line with the commitment to protect 30% of land and ocean. They've been voting against it, and in the coming month, there will be what is known in the jargon in Europe a trilogue, not a dialogue, trilogue, because three parties, the European Council, the European Parliament, and the European Commission. When there is a disagreement, they do what they call a trialogue. And that trialogue will begin when Spain holds the presidency of the European Council. If the Spanish government or the Spanish presidency is held by this band of climate deniers and environmental crisis deniers that I was talking about earlier, the Conservatives, it will be bad news for the trialogue. If, on the other hand, the current government of Pedro Sanchez wins a majority, it will be good news because they have been supporting very actively this target of 30 by 30, as we call it, and the proposed law on the restoration of nature. So, and indeed, Teresa Rivera, the deputy prime minister, was very forceful in Montreal, I remember very well. And we have to cross our fingers. But the best way to cross your fingers is to vote well. So if any of you votes in Spain or has friends who vote in Spain, neighbors who vote in Spain, well, please emphasize that it is important for the environment, for the ecological transition, for the energy transition towards an increased use and production of renewable energy, to vote to make sure that the progressive government remains in place in Spain. It has consequences for Spain, of course, but also for Europe and for the rest of the world, as I explained. Take the example of the climate negotiations, for example. Can you imagine climate deniers representing Spain in the climate negotiations? I mean, you know, we just did away with Bolsonaro. We don't need a Spanish Bolsonaro.
I think that's pretty clearly explained. Can you talk a little bit about how the conservation efforts in the recent UN High Seas Treaty is working, or what your status, what your view is of the, I guess, the world's oceans?
For more than 10 years, I've been working for many years on that issue. Actually, there has been a negotiation to create a framework for the conservation and sustainable use of high seas biodiversity. What is the high seas? Well, it's this vast area of the ocean beyond national jurisdictions. You know, coastal states have jurisdiction over generally 200 nautical miles. And beyond that, there was no framework to harmonize policies. And I mean, some people were saying it was like the Far West, you know, the far wet was the expression that was used. To some extent, it's not entirely true because there was some sectoral agreements. There are regarding shipping, for example, and fisheries. But all in all, marine biodiversity is not well managed internationally beyond national jurisdiction. And now, just a couple of weeks ago, finally, the United Nations has adopted formally this text that we've been working for actually nearly 20 years. Now, what is needed is for it to enter into force. It needs ratifications by a large number of countries. This is another example. If you don't have leadership at the national level and at the EU level, well, that will drag on. So it's very important, you know, to have governments that are committed to better international governance of our environment and indeed of the ocean, so that we can move forward with international policies that can protect the ocean and the environment. So what concretely this UN agreement can do? Well, when it enters into force, it will permit the creation of marine protected areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction. That is to say, to keep it simple, in international waters. At the moment, it's hardly impossible to have marine protected areas in this vast area of the ocean, which represents no less than 45% of the surface of our planet. Maybe I should have started with that. The high seas beyond national jurisdiction, it's 45% of our planet. So think about it. And even more, the ocean, I'm sure most of you have read that the ocean represents 70% of the surface of the planet. The ocean, national waters, territorial waters, jurisdictional waters, and the high seas, the whole thing, 70%, right? But if you look 3Ds, in 3 dimensions, in fact, it's around 96 or 98% of the living space of our planet. You understand what I mean?
Yeah. And
3Ds,
from what I
right?
understand,
Not just the superficie, but the entire volume of the ocean is essential. And by the way, climate change, the link between climate change and the ocean, it's something that I've been working on in the last few years very intensely with a coalition of governments and NGOs. The ocean is essential to mitigate climate change. I mean, it's absorbing 90% of the excess heat that we are producing, and but this has a cost. The ocean, as I'm sure you know, is warming, and also the chemical composition of the ocean is changing due to increased concentrations of CO2 in the ocean. That's what we call ocean acidification. And these phenomena have consequences, of course, for marine life and for those who depend on marine life, especially the fishers, right?
If I understand, the oceans are 95% of the biosphere, and the impact of deep sea mining on the biodiversity could affect the carbon pump very seriously.
Exactly.
That's what absorbs all the carbon dioxide on a daily basis.
Exactly, and you live in Barcelona. You should make sure that attention is paid to sea level rise. Due to the melting of glaciers and the poles, in particular, sea level rise is taking place, and it's taking place at a rate which is faster than what had been anticipated originally by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So adaptation to this reality, which is coming no matter what, even if action to eliminate emissions is increased and speeded up, now the ocean is going to rise up, and we need to be prepared. In coastal communities and cities need to take this into account as an emergency.
Okay. One other thing that I was hoping that maybe you could clarify. Can you explain a little bit the role of distant water fishing countries and the role, these I guess countries that are wealthy that can send huge fleets around the world to catch their fish and then bring it back home, and some of the implications against less wealthy countries, as well as on the biodiversity?
Well, the wealthy countries subsidize their industrial fleets so that they can travel long distance, and basically the fuel in particular is being subsidized. So this is an issue that has been under discussion for 22 years at the World Trade Organization. I've been part of these discussions for many years until last year, when we finally reached at the last ministerial conference of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in Geneva, just a year ago. It was in June last year, the first agreement to eliminate fisheries subsidies that contribute to what is known as IUU fishing. That's illegal, unreported, and unregulated fisheries. That is the first step. By the way, the EU just ratified about 3 weeks ago, on the 8th of June, ratified this agreement. So that's a good news. But it still needs more countries to ratify it for it to enter into force. And it is just the first step. There is a second step, which is under discussion at the moment at the World Trade Organization, which is the elimination of fuel subsidies, which contribute to overcapacity of the fleets. So, and it is an issue of social justice as well, because it's the big guys, the big industrial fleets, that get most of the subsidies. It's calculated that it's about 22 billion with a B each year given to the large industrial fleets by governments, by taxpayers. We're paying it without even knowing it every year. And meanwhile, the small guys, small-scale artisanal fishers are having their economy distorted because they're not receiving the support that they should get, right? So this is an issue of social justice and environmental justice, and it's high time that this gets sorted once and for all. And as I said, the negotiations in the World Trade Organization continue. There will be, in February of next year, another ministerial conference of the World Trade Organization. And if this issue is not addressed fully, it's bad news for the ocean and for small-scale artisanal fishers who are victims just as much as the fish of these unfair subsidies policies.
These trading practices. Yeah, I have two quick questions. One is, how do you fairly share, now that you brought it up, the marine genetic resources and the profit coming from all the tech companies that understand the power and potential of the seabed?
So that's one of the advances brought by this agreement that was adopted in New York just a couple of weeks ago. It's called in the jargon the BBNJ agreement, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, that I was talking about, which allows the creation of marine protected areas on the one hand, but it also includes a whole chapter about the sharing of the benefits of marine genetic resources from the deep sea, from the high seas. You know that a lot of the modern medicines that are being developed now, and in the sector of biotech also, come from the deep sea and in the international waters, which should be considered the world heritage of humankind. And so the discussion during these long negotiations that took years to reach an agreement were about the sharing of the benefits from these resources, which the big labs are grabbing. Right? It's a situation of biopiracy. Very much. It's the same thing that is happening also in the tropical forests, right? And that gave rise in 1992 to the adoption of the UN Framework Convention on Biological Diversity. And similarly, there was a deal. Okay, we'll protect tropical forests, but in exchange, companies using genetic resources from the forest must commit to sharing the benefits with the people, with the countries of origin, right? That's working more or less well, of course, but that's the law since the UN Convention on Biological Diversity of 1992 was adopted and entered into force a few years later, and there was some supplementary agreements to it. It's known as the Nagoya Protocol. Well, similar, but this was not applying to the high seas. Now the agreement says, okay, we can protect the high seas, for example, through marine protected areas, and also there is an obligation to carry environmental impact assessments in the high seas before you exploit it. But in exchange, the rich countries that exploit marine genetic resources and their industrial sector must commit to share the benefits. And so there are many ways to share the benefits. There is sharing the financial benefits, but also, for example, the medicines that are extracted from these marine genetic resources. So take the pandemic, for example. Well, if the vaccines or medicines that can address these sorts of pandemic come from the high seas, it is only fair that everybody has access to these medicines.
Okay. And then, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I understand that there has been some opposition from France and Spain against the ban on seabed mining. And I guess this is what is a red flag for you, but can you share with us what this means to you?
So I think there is a typo on your screen.
Okay.
It's actually the governments of France and Spain have coincided in the fact that there should be either a pause, a moratorium, or a ban on deep seabed mining. And so seabed mining, what is it? Well, it's, you bulldoze the deep sea, the seafloor in international waters to extract minerals like cobalt, nickel, etc. And there, until recently, the technology was not there, but now the technology exists, and there is a lot of pressure from especially a Canadian company called the Metals Company, which has made a deal with Nauru, that's a Pacific island state to push for the United Nations International Seabed Authority to give the green light to deep seabed mining right away. And we're in June now. In July, in just a few weeks, there will be another meeting of the International Seabed Authority in Kingston, Jamaica, and these guys are pushing to rush the green light to deep seabed mining. But there is an increasing number of countries which are calling for a ban. That's what Emmanuel Macron from France has said, for example, or a precautionary pause. That is the expression that was used by Teresa Ribera, the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain, but also, Germany, Fiji, a lot of countries, New Zealand, Chile, Costa Rica, and I could go on, are calling for a moratorium on deep seabed mining because we just don't know enough. And it's better to observe a pause than to regret later. We're talking of a potential irreversible damage to marine biodiversity, but also to the carbon pump that you alluded before, because removing all that, the CO2 that is stored is not a good idea, and also it could prevent further, storage of CO2 by the ocean. So anyway, there is a whole body of scientific knowledge and scientific uncertainty which calls for a moratorium. So that's a good example, coming back to the Spanish election next month. Teresa Ribera, the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain, was the first European leader at the beginning of June 2022 to call for a precautionary pause. A month later, or less than a month later, she was supported by Emmanuel Macron. And a few months later, again, she was supported by Germany. So now, and there are more European countries that are concerned with this issue. And indeed, the European Commission itself says there should be a pause. Hey, let's not rush it. There is no reason to rush it. Okay. So that's an issue of leadership that has been exercised in that case by the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain and the Spanish government. And we want that to continue.
All right. So if I can, maybe to oversimplification, but a lot of times when we talk about, we ask the questions, what can we do to help with the climate emergency? And it seems like such a big thing that maybe individual efforts can't really make a big difference. But if you can make sure to vote for people who are actually leaders and can defend wanting to put some serious environmental protection laws as opposed to ridiculous solutions because they don't know what else to say, at least we can vote for leaders who take our climate and our environment seriously. Is that a fair statement?
Well, remember Trump? Remember Bolsonaro, right? Oh, we've been relieved when these two lost the election. So the last thing Spain, Europe, and the world needs is a Spanish Bolsonaro.
Okay, I think we can leave it at that, but I really appreciate your wisdom, Rémi. Thank you for all the work that you're doing to help us with this climate emergency and for people to understand the huge impact that it has around the world and the fact that we can do something about it. And I think you're an inspiration to many of us, dedicating your lives 50 years of advocating for the environment and now fully into the blue economy and making sure that we take care of our ocean.
blue economy, it must be sustainable, right? There is
Yes.
now everybody talks of the blue economy. Always add the adjective sustainable, because it's got to be a circular economy, not the usual linear sort of exploitation of resources without thinking of tomorrow.
Absolument. Merci une autre fois et à la prochaine.
This will be available, right? This
Absolutely.
interview?
We'll put it out there and I'll send the original to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you. Next time you're in Barcelona, let me know.
I will.
Okay. Take care.